meeting. Can everyone rise for the pledge of allegiance? The pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to just go in order. Approval of minutes be resolved that the board, is this on? Do you hear me?
Yes.
It's off.
What?
It's off.
Hello? Oh, now I hear it.
That's it.
Oh, thank you. Be it resolved that the Board of Education make any necessary corrections and move the approval of the minutes of the reorganization meeting dated July 6, 2023, and the regular meeting dated July 6, 2023. Do I have a motion? Chris, second. Jen, any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Superintendent's report.
Okay, so I would like Victor to give us an update on our summer construction, where we are. Again, with that, kudos to our buildings and grounds crew for doing an incredible job to this point in the summer, getting our building ready while there's a ton of construction going on. Victor, can you update us in terms of where we are in our project?
Sure.
And update the board on any issues that we need to address.
Okay. Is it feedback?
No, I don't
No? Okay. First, if you just looked outside in front of the lobby, we took down the canopies that were getting pretty rotted. This summer, we're in the process of getting rid of all that and putting the pavers back down and setting up for the new canopies that are going to come later in the fall. So this will be all set up for the opening of school and safe to enter and exit from that area in the next, I would say probably by the end of this week, that part should be complete. The middle school science and art rooms, pretty major renovation over the summer. At this point, the ceiling, lighting, flooring, and all the casework has been delivered and installed. That'll probably go up till the end of next week with some punch list items and substantial completion by then. We do have 2 pieces of equipment that we're supposed to, the univents for 2 of the classrooms were supposed to arrive the beginning of August. We just found out and learned that it'll be towards the end of September. In the meantime, we're going to look to put a couple of air conditioning units in those 2 classrooms to get us through until the univents arrive. The roofing project, the middle school new edition from 2000 and the high school edition, those roofs are substantially complete at this point. There's still a little work, but for the most part complete. The locker rooms are in the process. And the pool roof, we did we're in the process of finding out about an issue with that particular roof, where if you're looking from inside the pool, the brown wood that you see from the inside, when they started taking apart the roof up top, some of the slats were, they're supposed to be tongue and groove, and many of them were apart. So what we need to do, what they're in the process of doing, is getting appropriate materials to attach to that part of the roof, and then go from there. So it's definitely gonna, we should have enough money in the contract in order to move forward with it, but there was definitely, we lost probably a week in once it was discovered to figure out the right way to progress. They are going to cover the pool tomorrow, and on Wednesday begin that portion of the project. The 28th is going to be tight without a doubt, but it only affects the swimming pool area. So we're hopeful it's done by the 28th. You know, part of it depends on some of the weather, but that was definitely a glitch that we had on that particular project. At the elementary schools, we're doing the 3 gymnasiums where we were doing the partitions, that is complete. The Kitchens, they're still working on the kitchen hoods to put new ones in, and we're pretty confident that that'll be complete by the opening of school also. Just checking, I think I hit all the projects, did I miss any?
I think you're good.
Okay, any questions?
One question,
Sure.
for the art and science labs, you talked about the univents
Yeah.
not being delivered, what about the actual science equipment that was gonna be installed there? Is that available, or is that?
There's
My
no,
understanding was there was some equipment that we were putting in there for
No.
actual process.
you mean like the tech room? Oh, that reminds me, but you mean like equipment like the tech room that gets installed?
Yeah.
The science equipment?
Yes.
Equipment.
Science.
Science equipment, there is no, there's microscopes and that type of thing, but nothing
Nothing that's built in.
that's built in. The casework is built in, but that's all arrived, and that'll be substantially complete. The only things we feel that will be missing are the two univents. The tech rooms, we were, last year with the tech rooms, we were unhappy with the flooring, the way it was installed by the contractor. We had not made final payment to them for the last year because we wanted them to come back this summer, take everything out again and redo it. And I think they're putting the final coat on, it looks very nice, they're putting the final coat on this week, and everything will be back in place with the opening of school. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Ben, I wonder whether you could update us on recertification, please.
Sure. As of today, there are approximately 3 families who have not responded to the recertification process. We're having difficulty reaching them. Our hope is that that'll be done within a week or so, so that we'll be absolutely complete, 100% complete.
Right. And at the end of the project, Ben, have we found any families that do not belong in Jericho?
We found 2 families who withdrew their students, okay? We found another 2 families we had known about prior, who were living in other homes while they were having construction done at the homes in Jericho. Other than that, we found no other discrepancies.
Right.
Just one question, Ben. It was 3 or 4 families that are still outstanding?
4.
Okay, 4. Thank you.
And when I say outstanding, they haven't responded to any of our inquiries. I made calls last week and couldn't reach them, left messages. My guess is that they're probably away. If they're still here, they're probably away.
But this is already your, I don't know, how many, 5th
Letters,
attempt, 10th
calls,
attempt?
Yeah,
So-
writing letters, yeah, a lot of tries.
Okay, so this is, we're at the end of the process pretty much?
Yeah. It will be done, for better or worse, in a couple of days.
Right, thank you.
Just in, overall readiness, we start new teacher orientation Wednesday of this week. And I think we're welcoming, Ivy, is it 17?
Yeah.
17
17 new
folks will be participating in our new teacher workshops at the end of this week. And again, I think in terms of our scheduling and plans, we're ready to go, and looking forward to welcoming our kids back 2 weeks from today, 2 weeks from Wednesday. Our teachers back 2 weeks from today.
Opportunity for the public to be heard. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please tell us your name and affiliation if you are representing a specific group. If you'd like your statement to be included in the board minutes, you must hand a written copy of your remarks to Victor before speaking. As always, public discussion on matters relating to staff and students at which their reputation, privacy, or right to due process, or those of others could in some way be violated is prohibited. And there are no emails, so we'll move on to unfinished business. Policy 1337, be it resolved that the Board of Education adopts the policy 1337, duties of school physicians, nurse practitioners. Do I have a motion? Divya, thank you. Second? Jen, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Be it resolved that the Board of Education adopts policy 5660A, meal charging and prohibition against meal shaming. Do I have a motion? Motion. Thanks, Jen. Second? Chris, any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. First reading of policy 3270, use of school facilities. Be it resolved that the Board of Education accepts the first reading of one of the two versions of policy 3270, use of school facilities. Do I have a motion? Jen, thank you. Second. Chris, discussion?
Are we, talking about which one that we're gonna go with? So we can proceed?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so yes, that's the motion. Okay. So, I guess, I guess there's one main difference between the two that I see. One is basically, it's up to the board to decide, and one is up to the superintendent to decide. Kind of like opposite, so we should just talk about or vote or whatever, which one we want to go with.
Okay, so it's the version that we've been discussing, and then there's the version that is the board, that gives the board the right to make the decision. So we'll just take a poll, which,
I'm not sure that's actually correct. I don't think we've really discussed anything.
no, I'm not saying we're adopting, we can still discuss either one once we decide which way we're going.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're, I didn't, you said there's the version we've discussed
July 6th version.
and the version that gives the board the approval. When you say
Well,
we've
that was
discussed it,
Jen's characterization, so I was just repeating.
is that, I
No,
didn't hear.
I said, should we decide, should we vote on or speak about which one we want to go with and then go from there? How do we want to do it?
But if once we vote, then we've basically approved the first reading on it.
Well, then we can go through the first, well, we're just saying which one we prefer, and then we can then discuss that one, which of the two that we prefer.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to say, when we say prefer, does that mean we're approving a first
We're not-
reading?
No, we would have to all decide that we have to vote on approving the first reading as we discussed it.
Again, I'm not trying, I'm just trying to understand, so we're voting on which one?
So we'll start, whichever one we prefer, we'll start with that one as the base, and then we can comment on that one.
Oh, okay, so we're not voting on anything, we're just discussing which one we prefer to
Well, we're
base.
gonna vote on which one we're going to use as the base, and then, I mean, we can't.
Why would you vote on that? That's, you can only vote to adopt something. I don't think you can vote on what you want to discuss. And I defer to Mr. Powers. I'm trying to understand what exactly the process is.
It's semantics. Let's decide which policy we want to discuss. So we can't discuss two policies at the same time. We'll pick one that we're gonna discuss, and then we can comment on it.
But it's the same, I understand, but
Right, so we can take a poll or vote, it doesn't matter what it's.
oh, and you want to take a poll? That's fine. As long as we're not adopting a first reading, I think we should.
No, I just said that we're not.
Okay, I heard that at the end, after I'd asked the question.
I think it's clear that you're not voting at this point to adopt, but rather you're just trying to decide which of the two versions you're comfortable with. And once those two versions are identified, you discuss which one you want to run with. That's kind of what. So right now, just which one do you want to talk about, board? That's where you are.
Okay, so version one is the version that we had seen prior in July, I guess, version one. And the version two is the one with the changes that give board more authority. Okay, so everyone who prefers version one, that to be the base that we use to discuss, raise your hand. Version two? Okay, so it'll be version one that we'll discuss.
I'm like,
We're
we're raising our
voting.
hands, I'm a little confused also. Okay, all right, so we're discussing it, so we're not voting on anything.
So now we could discuss this version one of the policy, and then,
Okay, I mean, and I guess the one comment I have is, several months ago, when this room was filled with community members, when the auditorium was filled with community members, this board made a commitment, or a majority of this board made a commitment, and to say that we were going to better vet the use of our facilities. That was a promise I know I made. I heard it from Mrs. Vartnoff, I heard it from Dr. Foresto. I did not hear any objections from Dr. Balachanda nor from Mrs. Citron. That was what we said, that we believed there had to be better vetting of the use of our facilities. Version 1 of this policy does not do that. In fact, it goes in the opposite direction. Version 2 is meaningfully more consistent with what this board, majority of this board, affirmatively promised the district when these rooms were filled with community members concerned about certain events that had happened at this. And so, as we did with prior policies, or have people, I'm very confused by the preference here. So if someone can explain that to me, I would appreciate it, so that hopefully we can reach a unanimous vote on this.
The policy has been modified, even the one that we saw on July 6th was modified from how it was in its native state. So it's not that we're not reevaluating this policy, it's just that one key difference, that it's not the board ultimately making the decision about who uses the facilities versus being at the superintendent's discretion. That's the only thing but I see from this relative to the policy we had before, there have been changes, and we've been talking about changes.
Can you point to me where it improved the vetting process for use of facilities?
Wait, can I just jump in if you want to look for what he's talking about? But just by saying the board, the only difference that I see from your version to this version, or the second version, is that the board makes the decision versus the administration of the superintendent. Every decision that the district makes, the superintendent makes, is appealable to the board. So to hamstring operations by saying the board makes the decisions is just inefficient. And if something needs to be appealed to the board, any decision that goes on during the year made by administration very often gets appealed to the board. We get a number of appeals all through the year. So by just giving the board, saying the board makes the decision as opposed to the superintendent or administration, it's very inefficient, impractical, and it's not necessary because the board always has the right to overrule a decision.
2 points to that. One, and I defer to Mr. Powers, it's my understanding that at some point the board approves every use of facilities. What we're simply talking about here is timing. So Mrs. Citron's discussion about inefficiencies is actually not really accurate, because even tonight we're going to be approving the use of facilities, of our pool facilities, by people who are not district members. So we're not talking about whether or not the board is going to approve it, we're talking about the timing. So I do not accept your first point.
Wait,
Your
I just
second
want
point,
to go back to that point because we're approving pool contracts. Those aren't use of facility. That's not on the use of facility schedule that we're approving. Those are contracts.
I'm sorry, that's a difference without a distinction. That is, we're basically saying that it's okay for those school districts to use our pools. I agree 100%, as I've said in the past, that allowing the superintendent or his designee to say that XYZ school can use the pool between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. once the board has approved that contract or approved the use of the facility by that school district, I am not arguing. I do not believe that the school board needs to be involved in the minutia of what time each school is going to be using the pool. But it is a requirement that this board approve the use of that pool facility by those other school districts. I believe that's education law, and again, I defer to Mr. Powers. So that's the first point. The second point, which again is just a fallacious point. Your discussion of these people being able to appeal decisions to the board is not appropriate in this point. You've used this now, I think, for the second meeting. The issue that the community had was not that the superintendent was rejecting applications for uses of facilities. It was that he was approving the use of facilities that were inappropriate or not in many people's decisions on best judgment. And You know what, I've tried to get some information over the last several weeks to demonstrate this, but, you know, and I can ask Mr. Powers right now, with regards to the presence of Senator Schumer on our property. Our existing policy, and even our new policy, prohibits individual use of our facilities. Was Senator Schumer here as an individual? If so, it was a violation of our policy. If Senator Schumer was not here as an individual, but as a politician representing whatever, New York State education law prevents us from allowing political events on our facilities. So it's decisions like this, Mrs. Citron, where I believe, one, time allows us to become smarter. Time allows better judgment to prevail. Time allows diligence to be done about whether or not the decision to grant the use of those facilities. And for people who are listening or who are here and who haven't read the policy, the key distinction here is people who are part of our community and people who are not. So community groups, the PTA, the JAA, the JTA, the JEF, all of those groups would not need to go through the board for individual approval. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about if a one-time or a new user applies for use of our facilities, that's who the board needs to discuss. And people have talked about, oh, it's gonna take up so much time. No, it's not. I've asked 2 weeks ago for a list of how many outside groups request use of our facilities, and I haven't gotten that answer. So for people to say that it's gonna be a huge use of time and a huge inconvenience, I'm not saying it's not, but I've asked that question and I haven't gotten the answer.
It's summertime, Sam. I actually, the person who you asked for that information was delivering it to my desk late today, so you will have it shortly. I also, just for point of information, Sam, I did not view the reaction overwhelmingly to Mr. Schumer's appearance here. My question to you and the board is your very strong feelings that Mr. Schumer should not have been approved, but literally at the same meeting, this board approved our town supervisor to be on property for, again, a politician on school property for a photo op, which the board said was okay. So Schumer attending an event here, proposing additional monies to support the safety and security of kids was viewed as inappropriate. Mr. Saladino planting a tree as a photo op was viewed as an appropriate action. And I don't see this policy, frankly, clarifying how one was wrong and one was right.
Well, and I apologize, my memory is not as good. The Saladino, the only time I remember seeing him here was for the bus safety meeting. Was he here for another event?
Yeah, we had a conversation, Sam, and maybe do a memory check, that he was coming to plant a tree, and asked the board, given our conversation about Schumer, is that an okay event? And the board said, yes, it is.
Okay, and
So
if that's the case, I don't remember it, but if that's the case, then you're absolutely right, then that was a mistake.
Okay, and
I'm
again,
not arguing that, but
Okay.
I do believe that the bigger issue, and look, I still am asking the question to Mr. Powers from Ingerman, how do we get politicians on this? If they show up as individuals, they're violating our policy, and if they show up as politicians, they're violating our policy. So how do politicians, or in what circumstances is it appropriate to have a politician on property?
and Sam, again, we invited Chuck Levine, who got us a legislative grant for $250,000. We invited him to a board meeting to thank him for securing that legislative grant to support building improvements in our school district. Is that then, under your definition, an inappropriate event as well?
Again, two questions, and this unfortunately is starting to go the way of, let's throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and figure out where we think we're gonna trip Sam up. And
No, it's
that's
not,
fine.
Sam.
And so I'm still trying to get an answer. I can't answer your question.
Sam, I'm looking for consistency. Here are 3 politicians who've been in our district. You started the conversation, raising the concerns and putting it in the policy. All I'm saying to the board is, here are 3 events that took place last school year. Please give me some direction as the superintendent in terms of appropriate or inappropriate. Very frankly, I heard the board say one was inappropriate and one was appropriate. I'm looking for clear direction. I'm not looking to throw spaghetti up against the wall to see what sticks, and I'm not looking to argue with Mr. Perlman for the sake of arguing with Mr. Perlman. I'm looking for a clear direction from a Board of Education based upon tonight's discussion.
And that's what we're trying to get to, and perhaps if there was less yelling and more discussing, we'd be able to do that. So I still go back to, because I don't know. This is something that I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about, and I'm not looking to get hung up on Mr. Schumer. I think there was the incident the month before with the Ed camp, where that was where this issue first came up. So I think to move this forward, I'd first like to get an answer from my question from Lico to Mr. Powers. How do politicians qualify to get onto property if we're not allowed to have political events under New York state law, nothing to do with the district?
Sure, it depends why they're here. So if you have a local politician handing you a check for $250,000 and you're saying thank you to them, that would be perfectly appropriate. You cannot have a politician here on October 30th, 1 week prior to Election Day, trying to espouse their political views. That you're not allowed to do. And what happened, I went over the entire history of where you came to where you are today with this board policy. On June 8th, you had a long discussion and you directed me to make changes. I made those changes, I provided them to the board in a letter dated June 29th. I then perfected that into a policy, which is now version number 1, which is before you. Some of the changes I made, for example, on page 3, was the direction of the Board of Education, wherein you said that we're going to change it to use of school district facilities will be decided by the superintendent of schools. The superintendent's decision is subject to review by the Board of Education. That was added as a result of that discussion.
That's untrue.
And I would propose to take that sentence out.
Okay, but what you're saying, okay, Mr. Powers, let's, and I really didn't want to go down this way, because I really am disheartened, because this whole situation goes back all the way to March 30th. And I know we could start it in June, and we could do this. In March 30th was when we had a largely attended, by our standards, meeting in the auditorium. And people got up and talked about all types of things related to the Ed Camp event that occurred. And there were lots of comments made. There was Dr. Foresto saying, you know, is it fair to assume we would, quote, be closely vetting any request for use of district property? And everybody said yes. The superintendent agreed that we would closely monitor. As part of that, we talked about what would go on. Mrs. Citron said, I agree with the two Chris's. Quote, at this point with the volatility, I think it's obvious that if there is something that is controversial or can raise an issue, you, meaning the superintendent, won't sign it without thinking about it, or if it's an issue, you will bring it to us. So again, there was a general understanding in March of this year that issues should be brought to the board by both board members, me, Mrs. Vartanoff, Dr. Foresto, Mrs. Citron, and the superintendent. So that was the conversation that happened on March 30th, okay? Then we go to April 6th, where the whole Charles Schumer thing. Now, the March 30th conversation had nothing to do with Charles Schumer. It had to do with the Ed Camp issue. And there were a whole bunch of people upset about it, and there were members on this board. I would say that no one was happy with the negative publicity that this district received. No one was happy with the unhappiness that was expressed by multiple members of the community, both publicly and privately, both through emails and through verbal communications. And that's where this process started. And that was it, that it was going to go there. Now, we could skip over Mr. Schumer, we can go straight to the April 19th meeting. And at that meeting, when you said, oh, we were going to talk about this, Mrs. Vartanoff actually had to raise the issue of 3270 and say, why aren't we talking about this? And we then had a very long conversation about it. And that was where it went. And it was simply, that's where we started drawing a distinction between members of the Jericho community and non-members of the Jericho community. And again, you represent many, many districts. I've looked at many district policies. Other than ours, I really don't see any districts who even welcome non-community groups into their facilities. Now, maybe they do it outside of their policy, but most of the policies I've looked at all talk about things that go in. And I think at one point, you even said, at our June 8th meeting, you said that, this draft is similar to Syosset and Herrick's. I've looked at Syosset and Herrick's. They don't allow non-community groups. So from my standpoint, having the superintendent having authority over community groups, the ones that we've talked about, the ones that your firm outlined in the initial draft of the policy, your firm, like you talk about, we talked about this, we talked about that. You know that during the first draft that your firm prepared, that this board never saw up until 2 weeks ago, you drew the distinction as the board recommended at that first meeting to say, okay, Jericho groups go to the superintendent, non-Jericho groups need to go through it. And a final point, and then I'll let someone else speak. One of the key issues that happened with the Ed Camp issue and with the Charles Schumer issue is there was no time. There was a rush to decision. The Ed Camp decision was made on less than 24 hours notice. The Charles Schumer decision was made on probably 4, 5, 6 hours notice. And that's one of the problems. And I think that's what creates those two issues. So if you have a process where the board has to know about this, it makes it very easy. If you show up at the last minute, we just say, sorry, we haven't had time to consider your qualification. And again, I think that puts us perfectly in line with every other district out there, most of whom, if not all of them, don't even allow outside groups.
Well, the board actually had a discussion, and I'll point out page 4, where it originally read 50% of the participants must be school district residents, and through the discussion with the board, that was changed to one of the participants. That is your discretion to do so. So if you want to make it specific to Jericho and go from 50% to one person, you're allowed to do that. That's what the board directed me to put into the policy. I don't decide your policies. 3, 4, or 5 members of the Board of Education decide your policies. I take what I hear, I make sure it's not illegal, and that's what you agree upon, the majority of the board. That's what we run with. So I took those specific requests from June 8th, I perfected them into the changes that I heard that night, and this is what we came up with. Apparently, sir, you disagree with it and you came up with another version. That's okay. It really comes down to what does the board want to run with at this point, version 1 or version 2? That's kind of where you are, and I think
2 points.
I'm just finishing this. To the board president's point, the key distinction is how much discretion are you going to give to the superintendent? For what Mr. Grishman said tonight, he's very simply looking for, give me some direction, I'll follow your direction. Right now, he does not have that clear direction. I listened to what you guys said in June, I'm listening to what you say now, and I don't understand what you're trying to do. You either give him the discretion to do so, or you want the board to decide it. Whatever the 3, 4, or 5 you want to do, we can do that.
Okay, and the last 2 points. One, as you well know, and I'm not sure, I hope the board members know that, I expect the superintendent knows that, draft number 2 that we're referring to as Sam's draft, it is quite simply 98% Ingerman's draft that they never distributed to the board several months ago. That's what it was. It drew a distinction between community and non-community groups. And again, the point you're making is not an honest point. When we said that we reduced community groups down to 1 member of the community, you're basically saying every group could be a community group. I mean, sure, now you have Senator Schumer's, because the superintendent and the board president participated in the press conference, it now became a community group. So I understand what you heard. I'm not saying that you misheard it. I think that conversation similarly went off the rails. What I'm saying, and what I'm saying to my fellow board members, is what I started with. We promised this community that we would increase the vetting of events in this district. Either we're going back on that promise, or we're going to fulfill that promise. And that was the objective. And basically here, we are not fulfilling the promise that we made to this community in March, in April, to say that we were going to better vet events that go on in this district. And that's the end of the question. That's really it.
If I may, we talk about vetting, and I believe those were the words that I used. You've quoted them multiple times. And I totally stand behind what I say. I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds here. Practically speaking, definitely heard from the community that, you know, they were not pleased with the ed camp that took place here at Jericho. And I think we were genuine in saying that we were gonna more firmly vet requests for use of school facilities, so we don't end up in that situation again. And I think practically speaking, we have done that. I mean, I can, without question, we're looking at these requests more critically. Would you agree, Sam? I mean, Hank is the.
We've had one request. I mean, yes, we've looked at the one request that we've got.
And there's been a few things where Hank has sought our opinion on things, because right now Hank is still the recipient of these requests. And I think, again, I'm not gonna speak for Hank, I'll speak for myself, but I do believe that, you know, Hank being the recipient, or, you know, at this point, the person who.
Gatekeeper.
We'll call it gatekeeper, fine, I agree with you. Hank is seeking our input on these. So again, I just, you know, I don't wanna overthink this either. I mean, I believe we're absolutely taking a more critical look at requests for use of district property and district resources.
And I agree 100%. We did say we were gonna take a more critical look, and Hank has been, if something seems controversial,
He's been
Hank has been
communicating with us.
communicating to us, and that's all we're asking for. I don't believe that the board, anyone on the board, we didn't make a promise to the community that we're not fulfilling. You make it sound like we're shirking our responsibilities, and we're 100% not shirking our responsibilities. We are involved in the process, and we don't need to change the policy to take away Hank's discretion when we haven't found an issue with what he's been doing. He's been addressing us and asking us to.
And in the same fashion, and let me, you know, I hear loud and clear, based upon our discussions from March to current, the feelings of the Board of Education regarding political speakers in our district. I hear loud and clear what our directive, it may have been inconsistent in the past, but I think I hear clearly there is a clear directive from the board that I will follow.
I think it's also wise for this board to consider, once again, I always look at policies that it's not just about today, it's not about tomorrow, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, different people on this board, different, you know, one day, different superintendent, things change. So we need to put things in writing to be fair to the community and to protect the community. And so if we're saying vet, then we need to go that route. If we're not saying vet, then we have to go the other route. You can't kind of have both. So we can't have both. If we want to say that the board would like to vet who comes in outside groups, then let's just put it in writing. What's the problem?
Okay, so, well, we decided that we're gonna go with the first version of the policy, so,
Who's we?
well, we just said three of us voted to go
No,
with the
we did
first
not
version.
vote. We said we're not voting. It was
No,
a poll.
3 of us polled, okay, but
To discuss.
we have to pick one to, yeah, so.
I mean, it doesn't matter which one we
Okay,
pick.
so now we had the discussion, we understand.
So wait,
So-
I'm just curious, and this is really to anyone who wants to answer it on the board of the three. The existing policy, as I think it was Joe Lynn pointed out, was sort of an unfeasible policy, and it sort of went by the wayside, but it had rules in there that were ignored. By everyone's admission, just through practice. How would this, Mrs. Citron, I'm not sure why I keep getting interrupted tonight.
Because you're saying things that are so untrue. Everyone admitted that the policy was ignored. Where did anyone ever admit that the policy was ignored?
I'll go back and get you the word and verse, but it clearly said in there, what was in there? I mean, here, I'll read you the parts of it that, first of all, it was ignored when it said no individual, no political person can use our facilities.
But you just heard Chris Powers say that wasn't a political event for a campaign. It was for an.
No, I didn't hear him say that. I did not hear Mr. Powers say that. I heard
He just
Mr.
said
Powers,
that.
no, I heard Mr. Powers said that it may be inappropriate on October 31st for a politician to come here to talk about his beliefs or what his policies are. I did not hear him say that it was okay for a politician to come here. I didn't hear him say that, and he's here, so I sent this question to Ingram and Smith about 10 days or 2 weeks ago. I don't remember exactly when, to understand how politicians get to use school facilities, because as I said, New York state law prevents them from doing it.
Sam, I think we need to be careful, we keep talking about politicians and
That's not the
irrespective.
focus of this.
No, totally, but since it's come up, I think we should in fact discuss it, irrespective of what anybody's political affiliation is. I would argue that, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever they happen to be, people who want to use Jericho schools as a backdrop for whatever their agenda is, I mean, those are things that we should clearly be careful of. Joe Saladino planting a tree here, I don't know. I mean, if we're gonna say it's not appropriate for Chuck Schumer, then it probably shouldn't be Joe Saladino or a Republican senator,
And that's what we're trying to do,
No,
we're trying
I
to come with policy.
totally understand that, but that being said, if a politician is actually gonna do their job and secure funds for us through a grant or work for the Jericho School District, and we decide to, invite them to thank them at a school board meeting for providing, an homage tables or a $250,000 grant, whatever the case may be, that's a different conversation. I mean, either we shut it down for all, or we turn it into a situation where, we invite them. I would agree that moving forward, if, Chuck Schumer decided, he wanted to use the Jayhawk out front as a backdrop for whatever he's pushing this week, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say no.
But you said that we should consider it, that's what I'm saying, we, the board, should, and Dr. Crystal, I understand what you're saying. Well, my only question is, and let's go back before, again, the politician is one thing, this whole conversation started from the March 3rd event that was held in our district. And what I'm trying to understand is that was a request where I believe, I don't know when the superintendent found out about it, but I believe the board received an email at 4:29 p.m. for an event that was gonna start the next morning at 8 a.m.
What she said was shortly after he found out.
Oh, okay, I said I don't know when he found out, I'm telling you when the board, so what I'm saying is, and that's great, and Dr. Balanciano, I appreciate that, because that's a perfect example. We should not be approving outside groups to be using our facility on 12 or 24-hour notice, because that's where we've gotten into trouble. And the beauty of the superintendent not having, because look, I don't understand how version 1, as we're referring to it, helps alleviate the problem of what happened on March 3rd. That's my, this board is about solving problems when they pop up. How does this new policy at all help the March 3rd situation? It doesn't. Someone called up the superintendent, I'm desperate for space. Superintendent, being a nice guy, trying to help out, said, sure, go ahead, use our space. If there had been a requirement that you had to give 30 to 45 days notice, if situations where it was a new user of the facilities or an outside group needed to go to the board, we would have had time. He would have had time to understand what was going on at that event, who was going to be at that event, does that event fit what the Jericho community wants? And I'm not saying the decision would have been any different than the decision the superintendent made, but there were a lot of people up here who were sitting here yelling at us when we had nothing to do with that decision. And at the end of the day, and I defer to Mr. Powers, I believe it's the board's responsibility to oversee the use of these facilities. And the final thing, we got a lot of negative emails about what the board had decided about that March 3rd event and what the school district is doing and why we were doing that. And again, I'm not saying the decision would have been different, but we're being held accountable as we should be because we're overseeing the facilities. And there was only one email, I think, that I saw that said the superintendent, we shouldn't question his judgment because he's been educating and keeping our kids safe for so long. And the response to that email is, this issue has nothing to do with education. This issue has nothing to do with the safety of our kids. It simply has to do with the use of our facilities.
Understood, but Sam, look, in this instance, again, I'm not gonna speak for Hank, but I think, he's heard us, he's heard the community loud and clear. He's certainly looking at these things, not that he hasn't looked at things critically or vetted things in the past, but, granted, what transpired in March definitely hit a nerve in the community. And I think it behooves us to absolutely take a closer look at how these facilities are being used. That being said, about that feedback, I don't know what the attendance looked like for that ed camp. I don't know what the attendance looks like for a lot of events that take place here, because we don't necessarily take attendance, or we don't have, access to those records. But it's entirely possible that an event could take place that would fall under it being a community event, if members of the Jericho community are in fact present. So we could easily find ourselves in that same situation with a change in the policy. You disagree?
Absolutely, because, let me say, absolutely, because
Let me just make sure.
if you look at my draft, I delineate, and my preference is to put together a list and says, the superintendent can schedule whatever he wants, JTA, JAA, PTA, JEF, administration, unions, a list of the 15 or 20 organizations, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, that constantly use our facilities, Chinese Jericho Association, Muslim Association, whatever association you want. We say, here, Mr. Superintendent, we know, we agree with the principles behind these 20 groups, or whatever the number is. We, the board, do not need to pre-approve anything having to do with these groups. However, if someone else shows up, knocks on the door and says, we'd like to use your facilities, outdoor, indoor, whatever it is, it's simply, guys, you know what, I apologize, we can't do that on 12 hours notice. We can certainly do it on 30 days notice, because we'll have a board meeting before then. But why are we suddenly saying we have an obligation to open ourselves up to that risk? Because I've said, and I haven't heard Mr. Powers speak, I haven't seen any other school district that does it. And by the way, I think we should. We are a wealthy district. We have tremendous resources. I believe we should share it with as many people as we possibly can. However, we, the board, we, the whole school district, need to make sure that the people who are using it are who we want to be. And again, when you have the board reviewing it, it creates a process, not a 5 or 6 hour type of, or 12-hour approval, and that's where we've gotten into trouble.
Look, I agree with you in part, but I also think that this can hamstring us. How? Good question. Let's say we went forward with this list of pre-vetted organizations that may use Jericho School District property. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Fire Department, whatever it may be. JA. Let's say the Make-A-Wish Foundation approached us on short notice. Again, I think they happen to be a fine organization. I don't think they do anything controversial. That's my opinion. If they approached us with 2 days' notice and said, hey, listen, we were supposed to meet at I don't pick any place, a Knights of Columbus Hall, and it fell through. We're doing something that's good for the community. Can we do it in Jericho, and the facilities are available? In that case, I feel bad about denying them that opportunity, because this policy exists and we can't achieve that.
I would feel really bad too, but we also have to look at the flip side of a different organization requesting to use our facilities that might be controversial, that might make people upset. You have to take the good with the bad. We need to look at both sides, and we need to protect.
If three of you felt bad enough, you can have a board meeting in 2 hours and say yes. That can happen all the time. All the time. It would just take 3 of you.
That's it.
We got here for,
I'm saying 3. It would have to, I'm just saying 3.
guys, don't
That would be,
forget how we arrived to discuss this policy. Please don't forget why we arrived to discuss this policy. We arrived to discuss this policy because there was a couple of events that happened that put the district, caused the district a lot of grief and a lot of discussion and a lot of emails and all that stuff. So when you guys are voting on this right now, just take that into account. What can we do to make this better? So we don't have to deal with this in the future. We can protect the community, make it fair. And once again, we will, like Myra said, if we want to approve, there's many fine organizations out there, outside organizations. If we want to approve them, we really wanted to, we can. We all live 5 minutes away. We can do it.
As I said before, ever since this happened, we've had practically a better way of looking at it. When it's something that comes up, Hank has said, do we have a problem with it? And if we did, we could then call a meeting. But Hank is taking our opinion, and he's being more circumspect about what he's approving. So practically this works, and I call that we can't.
Wait, but what
Wait,
reality,
what?
what
Now you're-
reality
now
are you
you're
living
interrupt-
in?
Now you're interrupting me.
No, you were done, you were about
I
to
was
call for a
not done.
vote, and I was like, I wanna talk before we call a vote. If you're not calling a vote, I'm happy to wait.
Well, I'd like to call a vote on the policy, but I would like to take out the provision that says, the superintendent's decision is subject to review by the Board of Education. Because, wait, but you're laughing, but every decision, Ira, you're laughing too, but so why doesn't every single policy have, then every policy, so basically, every other policy in the board manual that doesn't say it means that it's not subject to board review?
So
I
then
know,
that's the
but-
case, what's the difference?
Because.
So
because
you know
it-
that every other policy
It
is
is
not.
not.
We're
Because
lawyers, we're
because it-
lawyers.
Because it makes it
The
seem like it's
inclusion
not.
of one is the exclusion of the other.
Correct.
It is.
It is, you agree with me, Ira, so it doesn't belong here, but every decision is subject to review.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree.
Well, then you do, because then you think we should add that to every single policy.
No, I don't think you need to add to every single
I
policy.
don't think every single policy is.
Not every
the
single
same.
policy
So
is
let's not change
It's
the
subject
subject,
to one
let's not
person's
change this
decision.
conversation about a
Subject to
blanket
five
about all
people's
policies.
But
So-
you know what, you make these pronouncements, we have to look at the future, the past, so I'm making a pronouncement too, but you know, yours is okay, but mine isn't.
I never said
And I
that.
don't, you just
I
did.
didn't say that, I'm just saying, let's
You
not,
did.
we're not voting on other policies tonight, we're talking about
Right,
this
so I
policy.
would like to remove that
We're talking
sentence.
about this policy and I'm saying, look at the past, look at the future, yes, we're not talking about other policies, so
Right,
as
well,
far as this
I'm
language.
suggesting to remove that sentence.
Okay, that's fine, you can suggest whatever you want, we could agree to disagree, and we can either continue to talk, if somebody else has something to say. This is an important policy, I think if there's someone else that has something to say and wants to add, please, and if not, then,
I'm just gonna, like I said, I'm looking to labor this, I'm gonna say two last things. Mrs. Citron, I don't know what world you're living in. Because as we talked about, on March 30th, we had a meeting in this room where we discussed, in the auditorium, where we discussed the concerns about access to our facilities. And in your words, everybody was on the same page, everybody was in agreement. And, oh, look at that, I think I have it somewhere. March 30th, Mrs. Citron, at this point, I'll tell you this obvious, that if something's controversial or could raise an issue, you won't just sign it. I think we all have the same marching orders, I think we were all on the same page. That was 100% completely wrong, because the Senator Schumer incident occurred 6 days later. Okay, that's it. And the second point, and it's my last point, then we can go and vote and be silly. 100%, we are not fulfilling the promise that we made to the community on March 30th. 100%, we are not fulfilling the promise that we made to the community on April 19th. 100%, we're not fulfilling the promise we made to the community on May 18th. 100%, we're not fulfilling the promise we made to the community on June 8th. And 100%, we're not fulfilling the promise to the community on July 6th that we were going to better vet, because we are not doing that at all. 100%, no vetting. We're not doing anything. We as a board have basically taken any input that we have on this process out of our hands. The superintendent now has unilateral permission from us to let anybody he wants into the use of our facilities. And so when you say it's reviewable by the board, what's reviewable by the board? He gives permission, in here it says his decision is final and unappealable. So Mr. Chaplin can't go up and say, by the way, I know that you have this group coming here, that's I believe it said final, it says it's final, maybe it doesn't say unappealable, it says
That's
final.
deleted, that sentence is deleted.
Which one?
This determination of the superintendent regarding an application shall be final.
highlighted in
That's
yellow.
deleted.
I'm not looking at that one.
That was
Well,
struck,
that's what that's the one we're talking about, so you're looking.
that's red line.
Okay, I'm sorry, use of school district facilities will be decided by the superintendent of schools. That's the same thing, it's saying he gets it.
And then it says
No,
the
and
superintendent's decision is subject to
Right, but
review.
that-
Yeah, but Mrs.
That's-
Citron wants to take that out, which I assume her 3 votes are gonna take it out. So it just
She
says
doesn't
the
have
decision
3
is,
votes.
the 3 votes who wanted to talk about this, the 3 votes who preferred that version. So if you take out that sentence, leave the sentence in, as, you know, I'm not trying to get into the legal ramifications, but basically, 100%, and I still haven't heard it. I still haven't heard how we are fulfilling our promise to this community that we are gonna properly and more fully vet events, because it's just totally untrue.
You keep saying 100%, that's your opinion, and the promise, we feel I feel, and it seems like they agree, that Hank has been bringing stuff to us if he thinks that we might see it as controversial.
He
So I
absolutely
think-
has.
So I think that we have moved in a different direction, and we have succeeded in doing what we want to set out to do.
That's fine,
But
again, we've
100%
had one
we
event,
cannot
we've had
go
one
on.
event brought to our attention. Absolutely, we've had one event over
That's
school.
not true,
What events?
there were
several
several
that he brought to
things
our
that
attention,
sent
we
us an
discussed
email.
it, and.
Hank, do you have a record of those you've
Yeah.
reached out to us on? Because there's been
There's-
a number of emails.
Guys, like I said, I'm done.
Yeah.
Mrs. Citron, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not saying, by the way, to safety is, anything I say is my opinion. You're absolutely right. So when I say 100% we're not fulfilling that promise, 100% that's my opinion. I'm not speaking for the three of you, the four of you,
But you keep
speaking for
speaking
myself.
about it.
Yeah, because that's my opinion. I think that you made a promise to this
And I
community
feel that,
that we were
that
vetted.
we've been doing better. It's that the situation has changed.
This policy is not that.
In your opinion, again.
I move to vote, and in order, in the honor of moving things along, I'm fine adopting the policy, keeping that sentence in, since it's, redundant. I move to vote on version 1, accepting the first reading as is.
Wait, you're not taking out your review by the board?
No, I'll leave that in.
No, leave it.
No, it's redundant, so I was just trying to take out a redundancy.
Take it out.
Oh, you want to take it out now?
I'm voting against the policy. I know that's wrong to say, but I think it's pretty clear I'm voting against policy, number one. I refuse to lie to the community, again.
Nobody's lying to the community.
It's not necessary for you to now say, make it like we're lying to the community. We feel like
This is very disappointing, once again. Very, very disappointing what I'm hearing, because you know what? It's one tune, 1 second, another tune, another second. That's why we have problems on this board, because there's people on this board that continuously flip-flop, March one thing, June another thing, and you know what? Now we're in August, we have very few people in the audience, and now it's like a different tune. Very disappointing.
you're portraying it very differently than what happened. We did not flip-flop. We said that there was a problem, and it was addressed,
And that you guys are gonna, all wanna vet, and now,
we have, so we
how,
feel,
if the board
we
is
feel,
not
I feel,
vetting,
I'm not gonna speak.
it's not coming to the board anymore.
We vetted the bus event, we vetted the ham radio
I
event.
appreciate that,
No,
right?
but I'm just
So it's
saying-
happening.
So don't make it like.
But tomorrow it doesn't have to if it's not in writing.
I got
It's
issues.
in
You guys know
writing,
what that
it's
means?
in writing,
No,
it's
it's
just at
not
the
going to
discretion of
be.
the superintendent with us being able to say yes or no.
But if there's a last minute thing, there's no vetting.
But it says in a timely manner, so I think we all agree, whether it's said here or not, we'll know about these things that are happening.
So if something comes to the superintendent 12 hours before,
Yeah.
you're saying that he's not gonna come to us because there's just not enough time.
He
How
will.
can he not come
He
to
will,
us?
he has, he will, and he
Jen, I
has.
can't imagine a situation, again, I'm not gonna speak for Hank, but if I was Hank, if I was a superintendent, and somebody came to me 12 hours before with an event that I had any question about, after what transpired in March, I would be extremely hesitant
Who in their
to
right
issue a
mind-
blanket approval,
Who-
and I'd be reaching out to my boss, which is in the school
Who would
board.
have thought that Ed Camp would have been controversial? No one.
Yeah, but I think now you're gonna ask for, but I
Exactly.
think now you'd be asking for an agenda, I certainly would, what are you guys gonna?
Really? Is that, oh, please, come on, Chris.
Yes, really,
But
Jen.
don't assume anything. In life, do not assume anything because you're gonna be disappointed. Let's have something in writing, like this is concrete, and you know what? There's a little room for error, and everyone's gonna be treated fairly.
If something like,
Anyone who comes to the school for permission will be treated fairly and reviewed fairly. It's not fair to not have it in writing. It's not fair to the community, it's not fair to the groups.
Okay, I'd like to move to a vote.
And then I just have
I'd
one
like
last
to move
question.
to a vote.
Are we planning on changing this policy when we get, not we, because I probably won't be here. Should this board change this policy when we have a new superintendent whose judgment we don't trust as much? Or we don't know as much?
Then you won't hire that superintendent, Sam.
I'm asking, I mean, truthfully, when it comes to use of facilities and using judgment about that, I've got about, I don't know, somewhere between 30 and 30,000 other issues that I'd be more concerned about when hiring a new superintendent. But like, is this a policy that you would envision seeing changed when a new superintendent got hired?
you asking me this question?
I'm asking whoever on the
Alright,
board.
so
as part of the board
I'll respond to
conversation.
you. So I think at this point, again, Hank has been here a long time, you know, his judgment, I think has been excellent for the time that I've been a member of the Jericho School District. Listen, hindsight's always 20/20. Anybody can look at a decision they've made in the past and say, hey, listen, I could have made a better decision, or I wish I had more information, whatever the case may be. I don't want to handicap ourselves here with respect to being able to share the wonderful resources that we have in Jericho. What I will say, and I don't want to be overly restrictive in a policy, what I will say is if something was to occur again where there was a question in judgment, I think the hammer drops. Then you have to absolutely codify this to a point where you have to say, hey, listen, this has now occurred again, hopefully it never does, and you know, what are we going to do to prevent that from happening again? I think right now, here we are, 6+ months, or about 6 months after that ed camp, which absolutely struck a chord in this community.
And Chuck Schumer struck a chord in the community, and so now
I think Chuck
now we're
Schumer
saying
struck a
it happened
smaller chord. Listen,
It struck. Let's not get into who it struck, how it struck, right?
If something goes wrong, shouldn't it be the board's responsibility, not the superintendent?
Thank you.
No, Ira,
No?
it should not. Who's the chief operating officer? The buck stops with the chief operating officer. Come on, you were on the board a long time. Roles and responsibilities. And again, this is probably not the place to have that discussion, but that rests. Who calls a snow day, Ira? Those responsibilities rest with the chief operating officer of a school district. You know that.
Snow day, I have no problem.
I'm using that as an
We got
example.
a snow day. We have a chief snow day officer now.
Okay, I would like to move.
Let's move on.
All in favor of accepting the first reading of policy 3220?
It's 3270, but
Sorry.
3270.
I'm sorry for correcting you.
Thank you, that, I appreciate that, thank you.
That's version 1.
Version 1. All in favor? All opposed? 3-2.
Very disappointed.
Now that we've talking about this policy, as an ancillary point, Mr. Powers, can you tell us why the initial draft that Ingram prepared was never distributed? Are we doing that one?
yeah, I have it around, so you're sorry.
Because I believe that at the initial point reflected what the board talked about at that first March 30th or April 6th meeting.
Sir, what I did is I was present for that June 8th board meeting. I listened attentively.
I'm going before June 8th.
We have provided to the board. I think it's really important for me to explain to the board our role in board policy. You decide your policy. You turn to us as to whether it's legally efficient. That's what we do for you guys. If you have a dispute, as you did tonight, ultimately, the majority decides. So when we provide to you a policy, it's for your consideration. Whatever you want to do, we can amend it, driven by the majority of the board's opinion. So when you ask me, what did we give to you when? We've had policies coming from OCs upstate, we've had policies that we looked at, comparing them to other school districts, and we provide to you information for your review and consideration. We will go with whatever the board wants to do by majority vote, as long as it's legal, and that's kind of our role here.
So you take direction from the board, not the superintendent?
For board policy, it's your policy, it's not the superintendent's
Okay,
policy.
then very clearly. And like I said, I did not want to get this conversation to this point. On April 19th, there was a board meeting held in this room. You were the lawyer present. We discussed policy 3270. Your firm went back and drafted a revised policy 3270. That policy was never distributed to the board. At the May 18th meeting, where you were not there, Mr. Goodstaff was there, but I'm sure you've heard about it. It wasn't on the agenda, policy 3270. The question was asked, why is policy 3270 not on the agenda? The answer from Mr. Goodstaff was that the policy that was drafted was not, he had been told, hold on, I want to make sure. The message as to what was relayed as to what the changes were got lost in translation when it got transferred from Mr. Powers to myself. So the draft I put forward was probably not the wishes of what the board wanted, and I wanted to do another run through to ensure that I understood exactly what the board wanted. So there wasn't enough time to get it on the agenda for this meeting. Okay? However, at that meeting, Mr. Goodstaff also said that he had prepared a draft and he had sent it to the administration. And the administration was the one who told him it wasn't consistent with what the board wanted. Now, if I went back, or when I went back and listened to that April meeting and compared it to what the initial policy that your firm paid, not the July 29th or June 29th version, but really the version that was being called the Perlman version tonight, which was the original Ingram version, you took direction from the district that was opposed to what was in it. And so I think you need to take direction from the board going forward.
Crystal clear, your policy is a board policy. It's not a Mr. Krishnan policy. It's no one's policy other than the 5 board members that are here. We will work with you to structure policies consistent with what the majority of the board wants. And that's not occurred tonight. The board voted on it, we move on. That's where you are.
Accept, resolution be resolved that the Board of Education accepts the first reading of policy 3271, use of facilities, materials, and equipment. Do I have a motion? Motion. Thanks, Jen, second. David? Any discussion? I believe this policy just is, not controversial. Just, all in favor? 3271, thank you. Recommended motion be resolved that the Board of Education authorizes the President of the Board to execute a memorandum of understanding by and between the school district and Allied Universal Security Systems that shall be attached. Do I have a motion? Jen, thank you, second. Divya, any discussion? All in favor? Amounts to be raised in property taxes, whereas since the voters in the school district adopted the 23-24 budget of 135, 149.20, be it resolved that the amount to be raised in property taxes will be 111,826,053. Be it further resolved that all board members sign the attached Town of Oyster Bay and North Hempstead tax warrant on behalf of the school district. Do I have a motion? Motion, Jen, thank you. Second. Divya, any discussion? All in favor? Victor, we need to sign that tonight, right? Everyone
Yes,
sign it?
everyone. Yeah.
Before we do.
Yep.
Approval of building level emergency response plan. Be resolved that the Board of Education approves the building level emergency response plan for each building for the 23-24 school year. Do I have a motion? Jen, second. Davey, thank you. Any discussion?
Yes, I would request that we table this for next month. I have not had enough time to read it, and I would really like to read it over, this is important.
And are there any significant changes in the plan this year as opposed to last year's plan?
No.
There's 0 changes, or?
We could do one of 2 things, all right? We could approve it tonight and then peer review it, and any changes that you want to make, I can amend it, all right? I apologize, the plans were done probably 2 weeks ago. There are about 600 pages worth of plans, as you saw.
Right, I could just ask, if you could just tell us, just what the changes were, not
There
that
are no
you need to read
significant
them.
changes from year to year in this plan, okay? The only change you can see will be members of the committee, which have changed, and dates for required training, which are not in there because they haven't been done yet, okay? So if you approve it tonight and want to review it, all right, any amendments that you make or changes that you make, I can amend the plan at any time in a month or so. Or if you chose to do it in September, I'll appeal to the state and say, look, we're still working on it, and we can.
I don't wanna make your life more difficult, and so you're saying that there's really extremely minor names, dates, whatever.
I've been through it with Oak Harrison, with the building teams,
I will-
and they're fine. They're technical in terms
Okay.
of emergency plan, what happens when, and they meet all state requirements, are reviewed it, many times, it's fine.
Okay, then I'm okay.
The fire chief's name is incorrect in the
But I encourage you, seriously, I encourage you to read it. If there's anything in there that you have a question or concern about, I can amend it, or I think they're fine. But if you wanna look at it, next month, come back and say, look, I think we should do X, Y, or Z, I'll be happy to amend it.
But simple names and contact info if something.
As long as there's no substantive changes that we don't know about.
There are, no, and granted, these are not, this is not a public document, this is for our use only, okay? Thank you.
Great, all in favor? Thank you. Be it resolved that the Board of Education acknowledges the receipt of the audit report prepared by the Office of State Controller and accepts the district's audit report and corrective action plan for the year ending June 30th, 2023. Do I have, we have to approve this?
Yes,
Okay,
Accept.
do I have
You
a
have to
motion?
accept.
you have to accept it.
Do I have a motion? Jen, second. Chris? I know the discussion is, Victor or
Sure.
Bill explain this, but.
Basically, the Office of State Controller comes in every 5-6 years and does a risk assessment of the school district's business office and other areas. This particular time, they chose the area of technology. There was, I believe, one recommendation of a change to a policy which was already completed back in September of 2022. So we were able to incorporate the corrective action plan along with the reply to the state controller, and we did receive feedback from them that they said that was acceptable. So we just need to accept the audit report, and we put it on the, well, actually, I think I put it on the website already, but we need to put it on the website, and that's it. Do you have a question? I'm confused.
Me?
No.
Sam?
I thought the last response from was that they didn't accept our responses.
No, they did. If you read, so the entire report is their initial draft report, and then the final report includes our response, as well as they always get to have the last word. So it includes a response to our response. In that, you know, we certainly disagreed with many facets of this particular audit, and if you read their response, they actually corrected a few items that was initially in the report. And I think overall, Patrick did a phenomenal job working with them. It was definitely a lot of time, a lot of hours spent on this. And I do not want to speak poorly of any state agency, but we are through this process and at the other end, and quite honestly, we did very well.
I think it's important to note, and again, we congratulated Patrick. I think Patrick spent half his meeting time with these CPAs, teaching them information about doing an audit of this type. They're clearly, their expertise when we met with them is not in this area.
Not that there's anything wrong with CPAs.
No, some of my best friends are CPAs.
For cybersecurity analysts, they're terrific accountants.
But again, I think Patrick did an excellent job of teaching them, showing them, and in many cases they agreed. In very frankly, in some of the cases they did not agree. I still stand and would stand by Patrick's analysis and Patrick's recommendation over the OSC.
My only question was regarding our policy 6470. Do we need to revisit that?
No, we
Okay.
we actually revisited at the time they were here,
Okay,
and so before,
so there's
again,
no
it took,
reason-
they actually came into the district, I think it was like last summer,
Yeah.
like a year ago. And so we knew of that issue, so we corrected it immediately.
Okay, so,
But it took them another 6, 7, 8 months to actually draft a report,
so our policy's good?
100%.
Okay, thank you.
It's already corrected.
Okay, thank you.
All in favor of accepting the report?
And as we approve the schedules, I would ask that we table Schedule 13668, and more than happy to discuss that with the board in executive session later this evening.
What page is that on?
The top of.
It's page 7, the bottom of schedule. Okay,
right. So, do we have to vote on that, or we just, we're tabling? We're just taking it
Correct.
off? Okay. Okay, do I have a motion to approve schedules 13640 through 357, with the exception of 13668? Call for the motion, thanks, Jen, second. Someone, second, Vivian, thank you. Any discussion?
13625, educational programs and projects, High Point Development, 2 hours of professional development. What's the focus of that, please?
Site-based team management. It's for site-based teams, training. The 3 elementary schools.
What are site-based teams?
They adhere to, I think it's regulation 100.10. Every school in the state must have a site-based team comprised of parents, staff, students, well, even in the elementary school, we have students. Discuss ways to improve the school.
I think- Yeah, Jen, I think Jen asked that question, and
Yeah.
we responded, you should have seen that, Sam, in writing.
I asked that?
Yes,
What's the number?
13625.
I know I have a response to it.
Yeah, we sent a response to the Board of Ed on that one.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I see it in the BOCES contract, there's the Erie Board policy, handbook. Are we, locked into using Erie policy? Because I know, talking to Steve Quick said, he said a lot of the district use the municipal policy, and if we want to switch over to that, are we able to get out of the Erie
Yeah,
policy?
the two major agencies that do board policy development, state school boards and Erie BOCES, those are the
Right, I
two
know, but
agencies.
that's, my
I think
question
they're-
was, to move
our
it out.
contract-
I thought we canceled hearing on BOCES this year,
I know we talked about it, I'm not
It
sure.
was listed in the BOCES contract.
but there was a BOCES contract for a final contract for 22-23, and then a 23-24. I'm not sure it was in the 23-24.
We'll double check and bring that back to the board for discussion at our next meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
I just, I'm sorry, and I don't have the, schedule number right in front of me regarding, the East Meadow Driving School.
Yes.
So I believe, my question was, you know, have we looked at other driving schools, and I believe the answer was, the RFP was done about 3 years ago. And so, what does that mean? Are they, like, how many more years do we have with them?
We could, I mean,
Could we-
we signed up for this year,
We
but
did, okay.
we can certainly go out next year for another RFP. I have no issue with that. There's not, I'm trying to remember back with the, 3 years ago, maybe there was one other company.
It was, there were,
How many companies are there?
I
I
think
think we've got East Meadow and possibly one other. And the one other was,
One other we've used in the past, or we haven't used?
no, the one other that responded to the RFP 3 years ago did not meet specifications.
Fine, and as far, I mean, I understand there's not too many choices, or there's 2 choices, or there is a 3rd choice maybe out there. Is there, like, has there been feedback from parents?
Not that I'm aware of, no. But I don't run the program. I think that's Dr. Brizanzano.
Okay,
we can check with him
Yeah,
to see if
I'm not
he's received
aware.
feedback.
so I guess, once again, is there any way we can to just find out, is there 2 driving schools, is there maybe possibly a 3rd one, could we look
Yeah, I
at
mean,
it
so
for next
certainly,
year, and can we
It's
get
a few years
feedback?
later, so there could be other
Yeah.
companies in the market. We
So
can
one of
certainly
the
check
things we
it
could do is we can ask Joe to do a survey to kids and parents through this year,
That would be
and then
wonderful,
do an RFP at the end of this year
yes,
for next year.
for next year.
yes.
I'm enrolled in the driver's ed course, so if you have any questions about the course.
How was your experience, I guess, getting signed up with them, and going through that whole process, and then, of course, the lessons itself?
Sign up is easy, I just
Okay.
had to fill the form, write a check and give it to Dr. Pizzanzano's office. And then the lessons, I think they really give me a better understanding of how to drive, being safe on the road.
You had
I
no
see-
problems, like, signing up with, like, the time slots that they offered you? and-
I had no problems, I requested the morning time slot
Okay.
and I got the morning time slot.
Okay. So you had a pretty good experience?
That's because your name is in the calendar.
The calendar came out, yeah.
Famous Ethan.
Okay, I mean,
Where's that?
The driver's ed?
But Jen, that doesn't mean we do
I
a survey
just- I think-
and we'll look at it.
well,
Did something come up that you had?
I have a very poor experience, just as a parent, personally, yeah, signing up, getting the time slots, the scheduling, it happens, right? And it was impossible, and then they changed teachers on my daughter a couple times, and it was difficult, there was a lot of communication issues. Okay, so, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions on the schedules? All in favor of approving the schedule? Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
No, to executive session.
Oh, a motion to go to executive session. All in favor?
I just had to sign off on the hour.